Hello everybody, I'm Jeff Abrams and I'm privileged to be the preacher for the Tuscumbia Church of Christ. I'm happy to have the opportunity to be with you now. There was a hunter. The day is about over, getting dark. He sees what he thinks is a deer in the distance. He squeezes the trigger, gets down out of the stand. His heart is racing as he's heading to the end of the field, expecting to see this gigantic trophy buck deer. And he's horrified to see not a deer, but it's his friend. He shot and tragically killed his best friend. What would that hunter give to be able to unsqueeze that trigger, to undo this terrible wrong? He'd give anything, everything, but he can't. The deed has been done. There's a fella, he's been working, and now his shift is over. On his way home, he stops off at a bar and has a few drinks, gets back in his car, impaired now, has a wreck, takes another innocent life. He's devastated. He's destroyed somebody. What would he give that fella to be able to put those drinks back into the bottle, to undo that tragedy, that horrible wrong? Well, he can't fix it. The deed has been done. There's another fella. He's a salesman. He's taken some clients to a casino to entertain them, and they're having fun. And he wants to have fun also. So he starts taking some coins out of his pocket, puts them in a slot machine, and he does it again and again. And he's also enjoying himself. And later, he goes back to that place. And he goes back to that place again and again. And eventually, he gains a master that controls him, consumes him, ultimately destroys him, cost him his job, cost him his house, cost him his family. What would that fella give to be able to one day go back in time and take those coins and put them back in his pocket and have a do-over, rewrite history like it never happened? He'd give anything, everything to be able to do that, but he can't. He can't undo that wrong or the damage it has caused. There is a young lady. She begins to flirt. She thinks innocently with one of her coworkers, and eventually things progress, and she finds herself having a torrid affair with a married man. Ultimately, she loses her job, he loses his family, reputations are destroyed, and they break up in a very bitter way, and she wants to so desperately go back and undo all of that, but it's just too late. The deed, the damage, it's been done. There's another fellow. He's sitting at his computer. Nobody's around. He's pushing on some buttons, and he comes to a page where there are some images of some women, and they're not wearing any clothes, and he likes what he sees, and he gets hooked, and he keeps going back to pages like that, and he too eventually loses essentially everything, including his family. How desperately that fellow would like to be able to go back and unpush those buttons and unsee those images and to somehow right that wrong. But he can't. The deed, the damage, it's all been done. May I ask you a question? Have you ever done anything wrong? I have, and I'm guessing we all have, right? Romans 3:23, we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. We've all needed a do-over, right? We've all needed to rewrite history. We've all needed to go back and make a bad situation a much better situation. In golf, they call that a mulligan, right? Where you hit a bad shot, you drop another ball, and you hit that ball, and it's like the bad shot never happened. In the Bible, it's called forgiveness. Forgiveness. And believe this now. The Bible is filled with people who did bad things. They made bad decisions, but they were able to, with the help and the grace of God, get forgiveness, get a do-over. They could make things better than they had ever been before. It seems to me in our Bibles, the best example of what I'm talking about here is the Apostle Peter. And if you would please, find in your Bible the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, because Peter here, you remember, he does something really bad, but ultimately he gets a second chance. Maybe in his case, he gets a fifth or sixth chance. This is Luke 22, beginning verse 31. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, that's Peter, indeed Satan has asked for you. Hey, Satan's asking for all of us. He's asking for you that he may sift you as wheat. That sounds unpleasant, doesn't it? Verse 32, Jesus says, but I have prayed for you. What a great compliment he's giving Peter. I've prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. King James says there, when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. So Peter is going to need a second conversion. He's going to leave Jesus for a time, do something bad, but then he's going to have the opportunity to come back home. Verse 33, Peter is incredulous, he's arrogant, but he said to him, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Then he said, Jesus speaking, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny 3 times that you know me. And then you remember Peter begins to make a series of familiar mistakes. Over there in verse 45, I see that he's sleeping when he should be praying, and we can be busy sometimes doing things that we shouldn't be doing when we should be spending those moments in prayer, right? We can identify with that. And then I notice next he is making the mistake of continuing to be an impulsive type person. Remember, they've come to arrest Jesus, and Peter draws a sword, and he cuts off the ear of a fellow named Malchus, servant of the high priest. Now, Peter was just a bad aim, wasn't he? Or Malchus was quicker than he expected. He wasn't aiming for Malchus' ear. He probably wanted to split his skull. So he's an impulsive fella. He's sleeping when he should be praying. Sometimes, again, we're busy doing other things besides praying. Sometimes we also are impulsive. And then I notice again additional mistakes he's making, 54 and following. He begins to practice social distancing from Jesus. He's discouraged. He's following Christ from afar, and as he's getting more distance between himself and Christ, he's putting less distance between himself and some bad people, and he begins to be warming with them by the devil's fire, and he's hanging around these bad folks, and he's going to now do some bad things. Again, we're familiar with this. We can put some distance between ourselves and Christ and close the gap between us and bad behaving people, and we can become more like them and less like Jesus that maybe we're pulling away from. And then predictably he begins all these denials, and 3 times, right, he says, I don't know Jesus. And then the last time, you see that there in verse 60 and following, man, I do not know what you're saying. Immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crows. Other scriptures tell us that he's actually using profanity here. It's like he's saying, I blankety blank, don't know the man. He hears the rooster crow. And then what happens next? The Lord turned and looked at Peter. And we're familiar with that, aren't we? I mean, we've received those looks of disappointment from others when we've hurt them in some way, and we've also probably given those looks of disappointment when somebody has hurt us. And so a lot of emotion here now going on between Peter and Jesus and that look. And then Peter remembers what Christ has said, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter, what's he do? He went out and wept bitterly. And what's going to happen to Peter if he dies at this moment? Well, he's lost. Remember, Matthew 10:33, Jesus said, if we deny him before men, he'll deny us before the Father. Good news for Peter, he does not die that day. Maybe he wanted to. Maybe he wanted to do as Judas had done, but he doesn't make that path. He doesn't He doesn't make that choice. He is brokenhearted. He's devastated. He's probably the most miserable of all people for the next 3 days. Now, he needs some good news. He needs that spiritual mulligan. He needs a do-over. Mark 16, our story is going to get better, especially as it relates to Peter. Look over, please, at the Gospel of Mark. Chapter 16, something amazing, unbelievable happens here. And I'm not just talking about the resurrection of Christ. That happens, but something also happens that is really special. Mark 16, the ladies, they've come on that Sunday morning. They were the last ones at the cross. They're now the first ones at the tomb, and they meet this fella, this young man. He's dressed in a long white robe. The tomb, as you know, and they're now figuring out, is empty, and they get this great news. Verse 6, but he said to them, be not alarmed. You see, Jesus of Nazareth, who's crucified, he's risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. And then verse 7. Pay attention to this verse, please. But go, tell his disciples, and then here's one of the sweetest of all phrases ever uttered, especially that would eventually find the ear of Peter. Go tell his disciples, here it comes, and Peter. Tell the disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you. So the ladies leave. They go find the apostles and Peter. And they tell Peter this great news that Jesus wants to meet with you. And Peter's got to be thinking, maybe even saying to the ladies, are you sure he said he wants to meet me? You don't know what I've done. You don't know how I've broken his heart, how I disappointed him. When he needed me to have courage to stand tall for him, I bailed on him. I was a coward. I lied about him. I denied him. I swore with an oath. He wants nothing to do with me. Yeah, Peter. He specifically said, and Peter. And isn't that great news for Peter that there's an and Peter here? But it's also great news for us because there's an and Peter, there's an and Jeff, and you can plug your name in. And Peter, and Jeff, and you. We're all invited by Jesus to come and embrace grace, the opportunity for a fresh start, a second chance, a spiritual mulligan, opportunity to put that toothpaste back in the tube, to rewrite history, to be better than we've ever been before. And you recall in John 21, right, that second conversion of Peter is given a serious test. And I want you to travel there in your mind to John 21. But while you're getting over to John 21, let me just remind you what happens here with Peter. When he hears this and Peter, it starts a race really between him and John to the tomb, to that empty tomb. And he's not going, I'm convinced, to see that the tomb is empty. He's racing towards forgiveness. He's racing towards that do-over, to that next opportunity to have a fresh start. John 21, he sees Jesus again. Peter and the disciples, they've been out fishing all night. They've caught nothing. Jesus on the shore, remember, and he shouts out to them, you caught any fish? They say no. Tells them, cast your nets on the other side. They catch a boatload of fish. John understands, hey, that's Jesus. Peter hears John say that's Jesus, so he's still impulsive. He goes overboard. He's swimming now, not just to Christ, but he's swimming to a fresh start. He's swimming to grace. Earlier he'd been running to it, now he's swimming to it, and he has breakfast on the beach with Jesus. Just as Peter's still impulsive, Jesus still serving. Hey, by the way, at that fire there where Christ is preparing the meal, the breakfast, that's probably the same kind of fire that Jesus was denied by Peter at earlier. So same kind of fire. And remember, at that earlier fire, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, so now he's getting tested 3 times. Basically the same 3 questions asked repeatedly. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? All 3 times, yes, yes, yes. And each of the 3 times he's given an assignment, feed my sheep, which is very similar to what Christ told him earlier. When you're converted, when you come back to me, strengthen the brethren. And so feeding the lambs, feeding the sheep, that's Peter's way of doing what Jesus has told him to do in strengthening the church. And Peter did that. He loved Christ. He strengthened the church. And that's our privilege as we also come back to Christ for the grace, for the forgiveness, for the do-over. We also now want to be busy strengthening the brethren. We want to be blessing people. We want to make sure that there are people in our circles of love and influence who are closer to God because we're a part of their lives. They're stronger Christians because of our influence. They're smiling because we're giving them reasons to smile. See, we get the do-over to do better. We've come back to Christ not just to have a better life for ourselves, but to help others also have a better life. So again, let's get this image clear in our minds, because there's an and Peter, there's an and Jeff, and there's an and you. We've been invited by the Lord to come and live the best life of all. I hope that today is one of the best days of your life, and tomorrow is even better, and the next day is even better, because we are with Jesus, because we have taken advantage of a fresh start, a do-over, a spiritual mulligan. I love you. Thanks for spending some time with me.